Nice to have all of you here today. Some of you mothers are lucky enough today to have your family with you, and some of our mothers are gone somewhere else to be with their families. So whether you're here or somewhere else, the important thing is getting free lunch, being appreciated, getting a gift card. Well, okay, maybe those things aren't the important thing. The important thing is just having your family around you if you're a mother. And watching that video, recalled my wife and I, when I was engaged to be married, I dreaded taking my wife to Dallas for the first meeting with my family because I knew what my siblings would do. They had already told me that when I brought her home, they were going to make sure she knew what kind of person I had been growing up. Apparently, my siblings didn't have the same opinion of me that I had had. And so sure enough, we had barely gotten out of the car and to the front door on our first trip up to Dallas to meet the family before marriage until my sister came out and started saying, "So this is the poor woman who's biting off more than she can chew." And then she starts right off the bat telling my wife what a jerk I was, what a creepy kid I was. And I'm like, just, tried to get her attention over her head and roll my eyes and say, "I told you so, I told you." And we get in the house and here comes my brother. "Oh, she doesn't look stupid." I assume she had to be stupid to marry you. She doesn't look stupid. And then he starts sharing a few things with my wife that I had done. And apparently I was the only kid in my family of four that had any adventure. They all led boring lives. And so they wanted to be sure and tell her, and they did. And then we finally got a break from all of them, and I saw her pull over with my mother, and they were able to have a private moment to just sit down and get acquainted. And I was eavesdropping, and she said, "So what kind of boy was Danny really growing up?" And without even thinking, my mother said, "Oh, he was the perfect child." So much for you, siblings. And then she started telling my wife what a wonderful boy I had been. And she was serious. She wasn't just trying to be a public relations expert. She was serious. She started singing my praises and telling my wife all kinds of things that I don't think half of them were true. I didn't do any of it. I don't remember doing it. But it's as if she had on goggles when she was raising me. And she never saw what my siblings saw. So, God bless our moms. They have a very, very special place in our heart. And mine does. I'm going to share the story with you, but first, that picture up there is my mom when she was in some of the early stages of Alzheimer's. For those of you that don't know, my mom lives in a nursing home in Grand Saline, Texas. And she's had Alzheimer's and dementia for several years. When it first began, we would still take her out of the home and take her out to dinner, or take her to the lake house, or back to Rowlett, which is where this picture was taken, to my nephew's house, the closest house to us, and have Christmas there, which is what that was, a Christmas gift. But even then, she didn't know. And that particular photo, we had taken her up to my nephew's house, and it's, 4,000 square feet house, big house, lots of people. We just kind of camp out and mooch off of people when we go for Christmas. So we had tons of family there, and we had given her a comfortable seat in the living room near the tree and the presents so that everybody could just come by and sit down and visit with her. She didn't know what bathrooms were, or where she was, or why she was there. But she was pleasant and sweet, and she would strike up a conversation with you if you'd stop and visit. So she did a number of times with everybody that would pass by. And I walked over and sat down by her once, and I said, "So Mom, how you doing?" She said, "Isn't this a lovely place?" And I said, "It is." And we talked about the place for a while, and then she wanted to know who various people passing by were, and I told her. And she looked over and patted me on the knee and said, "Now, who are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm your baby boy. I'm your son." And And she said, I had 4 of them, didn't I? And I said, yes, you did. You had 4. And remember your baby? He was the best, by far. I had 4 children. And I said, yes, you did. And she said, well, do you ever see them? And I said, I do. In fact, some of them are here now, in this house. And I'll go get them if you'd like. Oh, that'd be nice. And I said, but you know, I am your baby. I'm one of those 4. I'm the best. Well, I used to have such a great, big, wonderful family. I know you did. And then at that point, you quit trying to reintroduce yourself. You just accept that that's the way the disease works. And so I said, well, I'll tell you that your family still loves you. And those 4 kids still think you're special. Well, I always thought they were. When you see them, tell them I love them. And I said, I will. And I got up to go away, and I saw her fumbling down in her purse. And then she motioned for me to come back. That brain will hold 1 or 2 things for 30 seconds and let everything else go. And so I came back over and squatted down by her. And she reached up and got my hand and put something in my hand. I opened it. It was 4 quarters. She had taken out of her purse. And I said, what's this for? And she said, that's money. I said, I know. Why are you giving it to me? And she said, well, the next time you see my children, if you would just give them some money. I had 4 children, you know. And maybe if you'd give them some money, they would come see me. So give them some of this money. And I said, okay. The next time I see those cheapskates, those low-life kids of yours, I will give them a quarter apiece and see if they can get their tails down here to see you. There's not much you can do about that disease. And so it was interesting when several months ago, about 8 months ago, a friend of mine who has written a few stories for the Chicken Soup for the Soul books sent me a note and said, Chicken Soup for the Soul is looking for stories for Alzheimer's and dementia, and I don't have anyone in my family that has that disease, but I know your mother does, so you ought to send Chicken Soup for the Soul a story. And she gave me the link to the publishers, and so I did. I sat down that evening and I just wrote the closest thing to memory, which at that time was Mason going to visit my mother, Mason and Hudson going up to visit. Sandy and I took them up one time. You know, our visits are very brief because there's no point in staying long. She doesn't know who anybody is. And so I sat down and wrote that story and then sent it off to the Chicken Soup for the Soul people and forgot about it. That was many, many months ago. 6, 8 months, I don't know how long ago. And I forgot about it. And then one Sunday, we were at lunch after church, Rancho Grande, and I got an email on my phone and I pulled it up, and it was Chicken Soup for the Soul people saying, congratulations, your story has made it to the first cut of 200 stories out of 10,000. And so whether you make the final cut or not, we'll let you know in 2 weeks, but even if you don't make the final cut, you should be proud to know your story has made it past, 10,000 or so. So I was shocked and surprised, and then I said it to the family at lunch, and then after I said it, oh man, they're not going to accept that story, and I already told everybody that I sent one now. They didn't know I'd sent a story because I'd forgotten it myself. And so then I thought, they're not going to accept that story. It was not emotional, it was short, it wasn't trying to be cute and emotional, just telling a story. And then 2 weeks later, I got the email that the story had been approved for the final cut and that it would be one of the last stories in the book because it shed a positive light on Alzheimer's. And I had no idea. Chicken Soup for the Soul is apparently a pretty big book. They have, I guess, worldwide circulation. And so when they sent you the forms, to sign all that stuff, I just assumed they just needed, permission. You still own your story, but they have permission to, for excerpts and other magazines. And so I have since learned by emails that it's a pretty big organization, apparently. And it made bestseller the first week it came out. A few weeks ago, some of y'all came up. We had 65 bought and sold up here at the book signing. I was a little embarrassed, to have one. And now they've informed me that was one of the biggest around the country. 40 to 50 is considered a really successful book signing. So thank you, my friends. And those of you that I bribed and paid, family members, thank you for coming up and doing that. And so it's interesting still to get notes from people in various places wanting to either use part of it or whatever, and have had a number of inquiries about the song that inspired it, because the truth is, I really just wrote something about taking Mason and Hudson when they had gone with us. Mason was 12 years old, and she had, at that age, you're starting to get serious about life to some extent, and things like Alzheimer's diseases start raising your curiosity, and so it did her. And when we came back from it, it was an interesting experience, and that's why I wrote the story. So I'm going to read the story to you, and then I'm going to let Mason sing the song that the story was all about. And please, when I read the story, don't be like sitting there saying, "Man, they paid for that." Out of the mouths of babes, a biblical phrase, refers to the sometimes surprising brilliance of a child's perspective. So it was when my 12-year-old granddaughter accompanied me on a visit to see my mom. Mom had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's several years earlier, and I made the 250-mile drive to visit her every month or so, and the changes in her memory and behavior were subtle to me. But my granddaughter hadn't seen her in months, and the changes shocked her. Mother never made the connection to our identities. She didn't know I was her son, didn't know I had brought her granddaughter to see her, or great-granddaughter. One of her regular patterns was to point at a photo on the wall and say, "See my family? I had a great, big, wonderful family." The photo was one taken at her home 30 years earlier, and there she was, seated in a chair, with all four of her children behind her. The decorations showed clearly that we had gathered for a Christmas at her home. My granddaughter was unusually quiet on the long drive home, normally a loquacious girl. She stared out the window at the Texas landscape for much of the 4-hour drive. When she spoke, it was to ask questions about Mom, like what was her marriage like? Or was she a happy person? It was strange fielding those questions from a 12-year-old, and stranger still that she seemed so affected by our visit. She wiped a tear now and then, as did I. I was surprised at hers. My tears were because I knew my mother had lost 80 years' worth of wonderful memories. I didn't think my granddaughter had the life experience to appreciate that. A few weeks later, I was invited to go hear my granddaughter perform at a music cafe. She was a budding songwriter and a decent musician at age 12, and I loved watching her few opportunities to shine in public. When it was her turn, she announced that she had written a song in honor of my mother, a surprise to me. The song was called "That Same December." The song was sweet, and one of its phrases, "You feel there's something to remember, always stuck in that same December," was so poignant I was choking back tears. The lyrics took me back to the phrase, "out of the mouths of babes." I had worried about my granddaughter's comprehension of mother's disease, worried about her moodiness on the way home, wondered if the visit presented questions about life too tough for a 12-year-old mind. But her lyrics put things in better perspective than I had been able to. A well-kept heart, but a broken mind. Thoughts so lost, too hard to find. Memories dissolve away each broken heart and your wedding day. You can't recall any suffering. Oh, what a beautiful tragedy. And in that moment, in that song, I found such hope and inspiration. I had cried because Mom couldn't remember the family that loved her, couldn't recall her wedding day. But I realized that she also couldn't recall any suffering. She was a good, loving woman, faithful to my father, loyal to her family. I needed to be taken back to her well-kept heart and stop seeing only her broken mind. A 12-year-old helped me see that Alzheimer's can, in fact, be a beautiful tragedy. And that was the story. On the drive back from that visit, some of the questions that Mason asked just gave me an opportunity to tell my mother's story. My mother was indeed a wonderful woman, but her story was just unique. She was married at 14 years old to my father, who was 24. They married because they lived on adjoining farms. Their pool to pick from was tiny. There were no cars that they could drive into town. There were wagons. And up until she was 10 or 11 years old, my mother's family's way of getting into Kaufman, Texas was to hook up a donkey to a wagon and ride to Kaufman. So at 14 years old, she was not really a girl of the world. She married the 24-year-old down the dirt road. Not long after they'd been married, Mom decided marriage wasn't for her. So she packed a suitcase of all the things that she had taken into the marriage, and she walked down the long dirt road that connected their two farms. When she arrived at her house, her mother chewed her out, turned her around like you'd scold a small child, with a swat on her bottom, and sent her right back down the dirt road to my daddy. And the rest, they say, is history. She learned to cook. Some of her favorite stories were they lived in a one-room cabin. If you want to know about what it looked like, look at the photo in my office of my dad when he was a baby sitting in the lap of his mother, and his siblings and his dad around him. And that little shanty is probably the same house they first lived in when they married, because it was still on the family property. She told him not having money and not having food, and Dad going down to the creek and catching a couple of frogs and bringing them back to a 14-year-old girl and telling her that's dinner. And her not knowing how to cook frogs or frog legs. And that's a story I'll share with you if you're not fixing to eat lunch. It's very, very interesting. But it was also just an existence in many ways. Nowadays, we're so caught up in romance and the intrigue and mystery of love. It's hard to relate. I didn't know if I could even explain it to a 12-year-old girl. And yet, when she wrote that song, there were so many phrases in it. Built a life around a love, not a lot, but just enough. And so, it's not a church song, it's just Mother's Day, I guess just for me. So enjoy my treat.
For babies fed and raised and grown, you watch them leave your modest home, off to war and life and work, ups and downs and joy and hurt. Raise their kids to know your name, even though you're not the same. Stand at the foot of your simple bed. Their faces are clouded in your head. A flawless time, this kind of love. All grown up, but still so young. You feel there's something to remember. Always stuck so lost, too hard to find. Memories dissolve away, each broken heart in your wedding day. You can't recall any suffering. Oh, what a beautiful tragedy. A flawless time, this kind of love, all grown up but still so young. You feel there's something to remember, always stuck in that same December. I want to wake you from your sleep. I want your eyes, my face to keep. I look at you solemnly.